human memory, thinking, and bodily regulation are orchestrated by the brain, which is estimated to contain roughly 200 billion cells in total. The brain is often compared to a computer, but in terms of information processing speed, it is said to match the capabilities of cutting-edge supercomputers. Despite its complexity, it maintains a well-regulated information processing architecture, and humanity still cannot fully replicate these mechanisms in computers. Some estimates suggest that the brain's activity in 1 second corresponds to 40 minutes of a supercomputer's work. Moreover, the brain's information processing combines parallelism, distribution, and hierarchical design, integrating electrical signaling with chemical transmission so efficiently that it surpasses the computer metaphor in performance. At the same time, people say the brain sustains this level of performance without engaging all of its parts at once. The popular notion that we only use 10 to 15% of the brain persists. But in reality, not all brain cells are active at every moment. So, what would happen if the brain were used 100%? If the brain operated at full capacity, what would we experience and what would happen to the body? In this episode, we'll examine what happens when humans use 100% of the brain, focusing on energy supply, circulation, perception, and cognition. Why did the idea arise that only 10 to 15% of the brain is used? There are three main threads. 1. The claim that Einstein said, humans only tap into 10% of their potential. The quote's context and authenticity are disputed, but potential took on a life of its own, fueling a widespread misunderstanding. 2. The belief that approximately 90% of the brain consists of glial cells that were once thought to support neurons but be unnecessary for information transmission, which led to the inference that the remaining 10% carried the load of signaling. Today, we know glia are crucial for metabolism, immune regulation, and synapse tuning. 3. The observation of silent areas that did not respond to stimulation or whose roles were unclear, leading to the conclusion that the brain is not fully used. In hindsight, these results likely reflected limits of measurement and the task-dependent nature of brain activation. In short, not all regions are active all the time does not mean useless regions exist. These notions are now rejected or considered unreliable. Each class of brain cells has roles and activates only when their assigned information arrives. In addition, the brain doesn't fire all regions simultaneously. It rotates usage across areas, creating rest windows to preserve function. If parts of the brain truly remained unused, they would have been eliminated by evolution. The prevailing view is that the cells we have are present because they are necessary. In any case, the idea that some parts of the brain are never used is being discredited. Even so, the entire brain is not active at once. The brain does not respond uniformly to stimuli. Different regions activate depending on the kind of stimulus, which has been demonstrated scientifically. The brain also reconfigures networks dynamically based on context, goals, and learning history, so the optimal way to use it changes from moment to moment. Then why doesn't the brain operate all at once? Considering what would happen if the brain ran at 100% gives us the answer. The brain comprises about 2 to 3% of body weight, yet it uses roughly 20% of the body's circulating oxygen to fuel cellular activity. Energy production requires not only oxygen but also glucose, and an adult brain consumes about 120 grams of glucose per day. To deliver oxygen and glucose, the brain taps about 15% of total cardiac output continuously. Furthermore, because the brain must tightly maintain temperature, pH, and ionic balance, overactivation imposes immediate overload on metabolism and homeostasis. If the brain were driven to 100%, oxygen use and glucose consumption would surge dramatically. This is not mere increased focus. but near global simultaneous drive beyond tissue tolerances. What happens to the body? First, cerebral blood flow would climb, while blood supply to other organs and muscles would drop. Organs and muscles would face oxygen and glucose shortages. Muscles would compensate by breaking down proteins, meaning muscle mass would be lost rapidly. Organ impacts are even more severe. The digestive system, which breaks down food into glucose, would be compromised, reducing glucose supply. As a result, blood glucose would fall, leading to hypoglycemia. High-demand organs like the kidneys, liver, and heart would then falter in a chain reaction, pushing the body toward circulatory failure akin to shock. Additionally, the brain's heavy oxygen use means it produces large amounts of carbon dioxide. Rising CO2 in the blood impairs pulmonary gas exchange, driving the blood rapidly toward acidity, acidosis. Acidosis disrupts cardiac and neural excitability, causing arrhythmias, seizures, and altered consciousness. And of course, a brain with 100% of its cells firing would be affected itself. Glucose deprivation from digestive failure, reduced blood oxygen, and heart stress-lowering cerebral perfusion would combine. Because these unfold within a short window, they become acute, and life enters a critical state. Sadly, the human body, as it currently exists, cannot supply what a brain running at 100% would require. This is why the brain likely evolved economy mode, recruiting only the necessary regions in the necessary amounts. On the sensory side, SF often depicts sharper thinking and the world appearing to slow down when the brain runs at 100%. In fact, greater brain activation can raise certain perceptual abilities, as shown in rodent studies. Recognition and discrimination of fast-moving stimuli improve, so one might read the color, shape, and license plate of a car whizzing by and perceive the world as moving more slowly. Heightened selectivity in attentional systems means better signal-to-noise extraction, enhancing situational awareness. As discrimination improves, more information is taken in and stored as memory. With wider recruitment during retrieval, recall can become faster and more accurate. In short, senses become sharper. However, improving reasoning is not achieved by activation alone. Activation helps, but training is crucial for higher-order thinking. Logical reasoning, problem-solving, and creativity depend on structuring, abstraction, and inhibitory control, not just more data. If bodily loads could be controlled, using the brain more fully might enable novel perceptual experiences. But the brain functions by balancing activity and inhibition, and just activate everything is not the answer. Overactivation can trigger runaway activity. Healthy function requires mobilizing the needed regions while suppressing unnecessary activity. After a long evolutionary history, the human brain still hasn't revealed the full blueprint of its mechanisms. Future research will likely raise the resolution on optimal use, opening safer paths to enhancing cognition. That's all for Curiosity Science. See you next time.